the present physics technology have far beyond from the past. So we all know we have discovered the Boston particle, stuff like that. And so what I want to know is what is now the ultimate challenge in the physics that now face?
Oh, well, I think the physics is a rather broad field, and I don't think there is a single ultimate challenge. I think, of course, the big challenge was to discover the Higgs boson. That was the challenge that the high-energy particle physicists have been faced with, and of course they did discover the Higgs boson. What that does for mankind, I think, is really not clear because it was very expensive building the accelerator, allowed scientists to produce the Higgs boson. And it's not something, it doesn't last a very long time. It has a short lifetime. So it's I think it confirms that the particle theorists really understand at a fairly deep level that kind of physics. And I think it wasn't clear at all to a lot of people that they would ever see a Higgs boson. And as soon as they saw a Higgs boson, I think everyone decided that it would probably have been more interesting if they hadn't seen the Higgs boson. So that's just one piece of physics. I think if you look in my field of condensed matter physics, what's really big right now is nanotechnology, and we call it technology, I suppose, because it gets more funding research if you call it technology than if you just call it physics now. But in fact, there's a lot of very interesting physics which one can do with very tiny particles, things that you can either make. Obviously, the smallest particles we have are individual atoms, but I suppose if you tear an atom apart, you have electrons and protons and all sorts of things in the nucleus of the atoms, but those are generally not very stable. But certainly you can talk about making something on the nano scale, and in fact that's been going on now, I would say, for at least 20 years. There's some good friends of mine at Bell Laboratories, in fact, were involved in that. There's a guy named Dave Bishop. Now, sadly, Bell Laboratories, which I think was the greatest research laboratory in the world, doesn't exist anymore. So, in fact, no one's doing those sorts of things at Bell Laboratories anymore. But there's a lot of nanoscale physics that is going on, and I think the idea is that one can ask a question, and then in fact you are driven to create a technology which will help you answer that question. And frequently in the process of coming up with new technologies to answer some curiosity-driven question that you might have come up with, in fact, you not by accident, but as a product of your research, end up developing a new device or a new technology which has many other uses for mankind. And in fact, when I give my talk later on this morning, I will point out some of those cases where new technologies have resulted from curiosity-driven research.
Why do you like to study physics? Why not biology or linguistics or any other field? Do you have any special?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I suppose that when I was very young, in fact, I think I was 6 years old. For Christmas, I got an electric train for Christmas, and that usually my father was a medical doctor, so he spent a lot of nights at the hospital, and so he would take a nap every afternoon, but while he was taking the nap, I tore apart the locomotive, because I was very interested in trying to understand how electric motors worked. And so then he woke up and he saw that I'd torn apart this toy that he'd given me for Christmas, and rather than scolding me and sending me to bed without my supper or something like that, he was rather fascinated with my fascination for things electrical and magnetic, and so he would bring things home that his patients had given him, and frequently I was able to make these into, shall we say, nearly lethal toys. He brought home some parts from the telephone company. He had a patient who worked for the telephone company. And so it had a solenoid actuated relay. And I took the two leads from the solenoid and connected them to a 22 volt battery. And when I removed the leads, I got a good healthy shock. And of course, I think probably most of you in this audience, I hope, would understand what happens, of course, when you interrupt the electrical current flowing through the solenoid. The magnetic field very rapidly decreases to zero, and as it does that, it induces a voltage across the coil. And of course, you have a lot of turns of wire, you end up getting a pretty good shock. So I took this thing to school the next day, and the solenoid and the battery were in a duffel bag. And then students, and all that came out was a lamp cord, the sort that you'd plug into the wall. And so students would squeeze the two prongs together, and when they released them, they would get shocked. And so I'm very lucky that I actually didn't get kicked out of school for that. But well, we've gone pretty far. What was your question, by the way?
So I think that answered my questions.
Okay.
Already. Okay, but try not to do that at home, right?
Well, I don't know. I think within limits. Okay, you can do these things.
Okay.
But this curiosity-driven. I mean, I was doing curiosity-driven research at that point, and I dare say I think that a lot of research is curiosity-driven research, and in fact, I'll show some examples of where our curiosity-driven research has resulted in devices that are very beneficial to mankind.
Yes, I interest in your answer, and I think, what the difference of physics and engineer? Yes, it's just the same. I don't know what the difference. Yes.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely that of course, there's a lot of different kinds of engineering. There's chemical engineering, there's biomechanical engineering. They're all sorts of different. But in fact, I think the main difference between physics and engineering is simply, in fact, what one could a lot of it you could say is applied physics. Then that's really engineering. And a lot of my friends at Bell Laboratories were doing exactly that sort of thing. They were developing new technologies to allow them to probe nature in some new and different way. Some of those cases, in fact, that forced them to develop new technologies, and some of those technologies are being used by the telephone company even to this day.
When you was young, have you ever think before someday you will get a Nobel Prize, and what is make you be successful? Thank you.
Good question. That's a really good question. And the answer is no. But I think that I should add a PS on to the no, and that is I think those people that actually pursue a career with the expectation of winning a Nobel Prize, most of those people end up dying as very disappointed old men, because most of the people that have that attitude are old men, I think. So I think that the people that are most successful in science are those people that have a passion for understanding things, and have a deep curiosity about about how nature behaves. And so then they come up with new ways, and I'll talk about some of that when I talk about nuclear magnetic resonance, which is one of my favorite ways of probing matter. So, but the answer is, I think there are people that go in with the idea of winning a Nobel Prize, but I certainly don't regard that as being the proper motivation. I think what you really want to do is understand something about nature that no one has ever understood before. And I think that's very positive, and it can certainly be very motivating. But I think those people that are looking for Nobel Prizes, probably most of them will never see a Nobel Prize. Knowing at some point that you might win a Nobel Prize is actually very unnerving, because most of us have very full and exciting lives, and the idea that you're going to win a Nobel Prize, it really, I can tell you, it really does change your life. And in ways, some ways that are good, like I get to do a lot of travel and come and meet a lot of different people all over the world. But at the same time, I'm doing that at the expense of not being able to do the research that actually got me the prize in the first place.
From that question, from the former question, so how is your life after you get the Nobel Prize? Maybe you are like a celebrity.
Yeah. Well, okay. I think you know some of the answer to that. I mean, once you get the Nobel Prize, everyone wants you on their advisory board. Whether you have any advice to give, if it's some area that is completely so far removed from my area of expertise, but they still want me on their advisory board. So they can use my name. They don't necessarily use my advice. But you know, I think the thing that I enjoy doing the most is this kind of thing, where I sort of do a lot of international travel, and I make a lot of friends. I hope I can do that here, and part of it is, of course, this business about stimulating young people to think about careers in science, because I think it is important. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but so what happens is you ask me a question, and that stimulates me to reply, but not necessarily to your question.
You know that a lot of history scientists, they have to change everyone's belief and something like that. Is it hard for you to think in different way, something like that?
Well, I think, yeah. I mean, as a scientist, I think, you know, you're really in pursuit of an understanding of nature, and I think at some point you're doing an experiment and you think you know the answer, but then you do something, you find, well, that's completely wrong. And so then you have to start thinking differently than you were before. And I think that's, you know, it's kind of this fun game that scientists play, that they try to trick nature into giving up her secrets. And that's exactly the way my chemistry teacher described it when I was in high school chemistry class.
Do you not feel tired? Like, it's fail every time. Did you feel something like
well,
that?
If you fail every time, I suppose you should think about something else to do. But I think, you know, it isn't that you always fail. You don't always fail. You kind of, you do learn from your mistakes. I think we all do. And so you, for instance, do an experiment that doesn't work, and then you say, okay, what did I do wrong? And then you try to do it again, and it's this. I still think of it as a conversation that I have with nature. Nature is a woman, of course. We all know that Mother Nature, right? And so if you ask a woman certain questions, such as "Will you marry me?" You really don't understand the answer. So then you have to ask other questions, and that's the way. And each time you do an experiment, you're asking a question of nature. So I'm not going to marry Mother Nature. I'm already married. Okay.